June the 24th, and I wish I could see you. I look through this little camera, and I'm hoping and praying that some of you can see me. I've had a couple of messages in the last day that these videos are helpful, and I'm grateful to hear that, because as somebody said, it's nice to see an old friend. And then they sort of said, well, maybe not so old. So you know who said that, and thank you for those comments. So today I want to talk to you about something, and it may turn out to be a series, who knows, but I thought it would be kind of intriguing for me to talk to you and build a couple of lessons around some dirty words. Now, just in case you think I've lost my mind, let me quickly say that the words that I have in mind are precious to us and fundamental to us as followers of Jesus Christ, but they're dirty or unacceptable, unreasonable words in the modern world. So let me tell you how I got into this today. This morning at around 5:10 or something, Denise and I woke up and we looked at each other. But we got up and we got dressed and we went out and we started our morning walk. And I said, you know, some mornings this is tough, and today it was tough. So she said, well, you know why we did it? And I said, yeah, I know why we did it, because we said we would. And so that led to a little discussion about being committed. I'm not talking about being mentally committed off to some mental home. I'm talking about the fact that sometimes we make a commitment to take the first step, and then the ones that follow are easier. I didn't say easy, but they're easier than if you hadn't made the commitment in the first place. Sometimes it's the commitment that overcomes the lethargy that we all have. And certainly that was true this morning. I told her, look, if you hadn't agreed, if we hadn't said we were going to do this today, I would have just turned over and rolled. I would have just turned over and rolled over in bed and had a few more minutes sleep. But I want to talk to you about the topic of commitment, because it's, I believe, an amazing force. Commitment can carry you through to do something that you otherwise would have failed at. The trouble with commitment today is that it's not a popular word in our culture. Everybody wants to make commitments, but only as long as these circumstances are met. You know, we talk about marriage, and I know that there's legitimate reasons why some marriages fail, but a lot of marriages fail because there was no commitment up front. It was a partial commitment. It was yeah, well, I hope it sort of works out. But there was always the feeling, well, if it doesn't, then, well, we can do something else. But that's the thing about commitment. Commitment, when you make it, if you really believe in it, and if you really put your mind to that word, then there's no backing out. It was April the 21st in 1519 that Hernando Cortez sailed into the harbor at Veracruz in Mexico. When he did so, he brought with him 600 men. And over the next 2 years, those 600 men, which were vastly outnumbered by all the Mexican forces and the warriors of the Aztec Empire, but over the next 2 years, those 600 men overthrew that whole system that had been in existence for hundreds and thousands of years, and before long, Cortez was the conqueror of all Mexico. So you might say, well, how was that accomplished? You know, if you go back and look in the history books, there'd been 2 previous attempts to establish a colony on Mexican soil, and they'd failed. They didn't even manage to establish a colony, but here now is 600 men. Not very many when you think about the size of Mexico. But here's the deal. Cortez knew from the very moment that this expedition was launched that they were going to face incredible odds. He knew that there was going to be danger and there was going to be difficulty. He knew his men would be tempted to abandon their quest and return to Spain. And so if you read the history books, here's what happened. As soon as Cortes and his men had come ashore that first day, he ordered that all of the provisions be unloaded from the ship. And then, to everybody's horror, he ordered that the entire fleet of 11 ships were destroyed. So here's his men standing on the beach and watching as their only possibility of retreat burned and sank. So from that point on, there was no doubt. They knew there was no return, no turning back. There was nothing in front of them that could stand, because nothing behind them. There was no option behind them. Their only option was to go forward, to conquer, or to die. So that's commitment, right? When you burn your bridges behind you, or in this case, burn your ships behind you, that's commitment. There is no option then but to move forward and to succeed. Do you remember the story of how Elisha was called? If you remember the story, I think it's in 1 Kings 19 and verse 19. And so it says that Elijah departed thence, and he found Elisha, the son of Shaphat, who was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen before him, and he with the 12th. And Elijah passed him by. But as he went, he cast his mantle upon Elisha. And Elisha left the oxen and ran after Elijah and said, "Let me, I pray, kiss my father and my mother, and then I'll follow you." And Elijah said unto him, "You go back, for what have I done to thee?" Or in other words, what do you owe me? And but Elisha returned, and no doubt he said his goodbyes. And then it says he took a yoke of oxen and he slew them, and he boiled their flesh with the instruments of the oxen, and he gave. So he's burning the oxen as a, he killed the oxen. Then he's burning the plow and all of that, and he cooked it and gave it to the people, and they did eat. And it says, and then Elisha rose and went after Elijah and ministered unto him. So what's it saying? It's saying that Elisha at that point, he burned his past, and he became Elijah's follower, not only his follower, but his servant. He was a simple farmer, but when he met the prophet Elijah, something happened, and he decided to make a commitment. Pretty no return type of commitment. When you burn the plow, and there's nothing to go back to. So I just want you to know that not only sometimes does making the commitment give you the strength to carry forward, but sometimes, depending how it's done, it might mean that you have no return. So what does it mean to make a commitment? It means make a choice, and don't worry about keeping your options open. Don't worry about leaving yourself a way out. It means from that point on, you're 100% sold out to a person or a cause or a goal. There's nothing you're keeping back. And the fact is, in today's society, that kind of commitment, that kind of understanding makes people feel uncomfortable. Feels like they're going out on a limb. What if the person that I've committed to lets me down? What if the church that I've committed to support makes decisions I don't agree with? What happens? What happens? What happens? And I think there's a lot to be said for caution. I don't think that God's calling us, though, to be reckless or foolhardy. He doesn't want us to rush into things without counting the cost. But here's the deal. Once we have determined the path we're going to take, we need to be committed to do it. I think there's far too many people that just say, well, I'm going to do it. I'm going to give it a while. I'm going to see how it works. But I tell you what, that's not what God's called us to do. And that's not, I believe, what is pleasing to Him. If you remember, the Lord talks about, I would wish you were hot or cold, but just please don't be lukewarm. I think being lukewarm, being indecisive, is something that God hates. God hates people who are wishy-washy. I don't think God's a fan of ambivalence or, all of that kind of feeling. He isn't pleased by people who can't quite make up their minds and are forever weighing the option. At some point, you have to act. And I don't know about you, but I want to be a person who doesn't act rashly. But once we act, and we act prayerfully, I pray that we stick the course. I pray that we're people who know what it means to be committed, because some days you're not going to feel like it. Some days you're going to look at your wife and go, now why are we doing this? Why are we doing it? Because we said we would. So that's my thought for the day. My thought for the day is that I want you to join me in asking God to help us to be people who live to our commitments. I pray that we won't be lukewarm. I pray that, I don't want to be spat out, right? That's what He said. He's going to go to those who are lukewarm. So my question is, are you determined to seek after God? Are you determined to go the course? I believe that even in that, there's a lesson for us. We've talked about how do you pray. Well, James 1:6 tells us, but it says, let him ask in faith, nothing wavering. For he that wavers is like the wave of the sea, driven with the wind and tossed. And don't let that man think he shall receive anything from the Lord. Wow, do you guess what I just said? If you're a wishy-washy person, you're wasting your time asking God to intervene, because His word says He's not going to. So that was my thought for the day, the first word. I may come back tomorrow with another word that for us is precious, but out in society now is increasingly out of fashion. Back in the UK, I remember that the average time that somebody worked for an employer was over 20 years. When somebody joined a company, they stayed there. Their word was their bond. And yet now you see people routinely breaking contracts and doing things like that. I'd have to tell you that when I hear that some sports figure earning, $100 million or something or other, he breaks his contract because he thinks he can get a better deal. I think, well, you know what? If I was an owner, I wouldn't sign that guy. Why? Because if he didn't stick to the last deal, what makes you think he's going to stick to this one? Let's be people of commitment, even if what we say is going to require sacrifice tomorrow. So that's my word for a Wednesday. Sure love you all. I'm praying that you're doing well. There are several needs that I know. If you're getting our emails, you know what I'm talking about. Some of them are really urgent. I just pray that you're in intercession and you're asking God, Lord, just honor your word. You've said you carried our sins and our sicknesses. But then I still have to end up, even though I really don't want to have a but after that. I want what I want. But then I still have to say, but thy will be done. So, it's my thoughts for the day. Sure love you all. I'll be back tomorrow. And who knows, I may bring you another